collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, improvements to cancer care in Cyprus.
The government decided to expand the oncology centre of the Limassol General Hospital to provide upmarket chemo and radiotherapy.
Parliament approves education reforms.
We have revised all the regulations for the operation of the secondary education schools, and we created a framework for the more effective operation of our schools.
The Cyprus Red Cross plans activities at the Kophinou reception centre.
Of course with the children, because the children, they are there all day and going around and they need to have some entertainment.
And we'll hear about a study on road safety with proposals to make stricter penalties for motorists.
They need to reconsider and revise the driver's test to include road conditions which are realistic, including darkness and, of course, wet conditions.
Well, it's been cancer this week and cancer that week over the last several weeks. And joining us this week is the Health Minister, Yorgos Mamboridis, to talk about plans for cancer care improvements in Cyprus. And in particular, I think, the inauguration, hopefully this year, of a brand new oncology centre based in Limassol. So what are the plans? Because at the moment, actually, anybody who does live in the west of the island has a very long journey if they come up to Nicosia to the Bank of Cyprus Oncology Centre.
Yes, that's correct, but let me just start by saying there are regions in the world where people have to commute for much bigger distances before they get radiotherapy. This is not how one goes ahead to plan the resources of all the available weapons against cancer. One could say, okay, let's build a hostel where patients can spend the night and resolve this issue, but this is hardly the point. Let me tell you what's happening with cancer in general. Cyprus, a few years back, didn't even have the option of radiotherapy. Someone who was suffering from cancer could not get any radiotherapy in Cyprus. They would have to travel abroad, and we only had limited access to chemo. Now, after the big investment of one of our most significant partners, the Bank of Cyprus, we created, as part of our hospital system, the Bank of Cyprus Oncology Centre here in Nicosia. The Bank of Cyprus Oncology Centre has 3 linear accelerators today, which has been covering all the needs of the population in radiotherapy. However, we have seen an increase in chemotherapy in the last few years, and there have been some concerns whether people are being directed to chemo instead of radio, which would be considered a better option. So in order to address this point, the President himself appointed an expert, an Australian expert, Dr. Kenny, who came to Cyprus and identified all the needs and drafted a report, a study, which advises the government how we should proceed on covering all the needs. According to this study, by the year 2020, Cyprus, actually it's in stages, by the year 2018, Cyprus should add 2 more linear accelerators, and by the year 2020, another 2. So all in all, 4 years from today, let's say, we should have in place 4 more linear accelerators. Based on that, the government decided to expand the oncology centre of the Limassol General Hospital to provide upmarket chemo and radiotherapy. In the meantime, a number of private initiatives proceeded to establish radiotherapy and other oncological services in the private sector. And it is my belief and the belief of the government that initiatives like that should be taken on board, and a centralized agency should be created in Cyprus in order to regulate all available therapies and treatments against cancer.
Does that mean that the government and Bank of Cyprus managed oncology centre will coordinate with the private centres and outsource, if you like?
Yes, of course.
Because nobody can afford to pay for their own cancer treatment.
Exactly. That's exactly what we want to do. We cannot have available resources against cancer in the private sector remaining idle while I have needs for my patients. So it is the intention of the government to regulate the whole market, private or public, in such a way which will allow each patient to get the right therapy, either chemo or radio, as per the right protocols and pathways, irrespective of whether they belong to the public or the private sector. So what we're looking to achieve is to group together the needs, identify the needs of the specific patients and direct them to the right service provider.
And what about preventative measures? Because that is very important in cancer, isn't it? That the early diagnosis gives you a much better prognosis.
Correct. The good thing about smaller populations like Cyprus is that you can implement national screening systems, and we're doing a good job on that. It's easy also to set up registries, patients' registries, cancer registries, and different other illnesses and conditions registries. By doing that, you engage also the universities in the effort, you promote research and development, you coordinate better with the pharmaceuticals, but most importantly, when it comes to public health, you plan ahead and you communicate better with the population, you identify parts of the population which are at a higher risk than others, you inform them properly and you screen them correctly. This is what we want to do. And of course this goes beyond the efforts with the oncology centres, because this has to do with the health system.
So where will it fit into the health system when it's up and running?
Very easily. Think of the cancer units. They might be oncological, they might be surgical, they might be radiotherapy, they might be chemotherapy, or even preventive or palliative for that matter. Think of all these services as an autonomous, separate, thematic concept which will run across all the health services of Cyprus, public and private. Think of it as, let's say, a military war room where our best scientists plan ahead for the battle against the cancer, taking full advantage and optimizing all the available troops and weapons, and engaging them in a coordinated and concentrated effort.
And a time frame for all of this to be in place? I know you mentioned the linear accelerators, but with some private companies already starting to do things in Limassol, it could be brought online sooner, couldn't it?
Well, if the private initiatives are completed within 2017, I will not hesitate to engage their services immediately.
So that's good news for cancer patients in Cyprus. And we've been talking to Health Minister George Bamboridis.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Last week, Parliament approved a government proposal for school reform. They did, however, push back the introduction of the reforms by a year. They'll now take effect in September 2018. Earlier this week, the Education Minister, Kostas Kadis, held a press conference, and afterwards I asked him to outline what the changes were.
With the contribution of all the stakeholders, we have revised all the regulations for the operation of the secondary education schools, and we created a framework for the more effective operation of our schools. We have introduced new evaluation procedures for the students. We make our schools more democratic. The parents, the students participate in the decision-making processes. And we promote the responsibility of the students We also modify the procedure of the access of our students to the tertiary education institutions of Cyprus and Greece.
The students themselves, though, were very much against some of these changes, particularly the assessment and the new exam system. How is that going to work?
Okay, the representatives of the students last year were in favor of the changes. This year, representatives are against. Okay. We respect their position anyway.
But sorry, should you respect it? Surely, as the Ministry of Education,
yes, we take
you know what's best.
Yes, we take into consideration the position of all the stakeholders, including the students. But we consider that these changes are for the benefit of the students, because we split actually the academic year in 2 semesters. And we apply examinations in the first intermediate examinations after the end of each semester. Therefore, the teachers and the students themselves have the opportunity in the middle of the year to identify their weaknesses, their needs, and with supporting teaching after the first semester to cover all these needs and to have a very sound background in order to proceed for the rest of the year.
What about the actual school hours? Are they going to change? Because there was a move a few years ago to extend the school day, and the fact that it's really only half a day means that obviously there's not as much time to do as much studying.
What we have tried is to maximize the use of the time within the school, but we have not changed the school hours.
Would you like to change the school hours?
Okay, it's a very big issue that needs a lot of discussions, and I don't think that it's something that is now in the top priorities of the ministry. But we extend actually the school year, and we utilize the time of June. All the period of June. Now, after the Easter vacation, the Easter holidays, the students used to stay at home or study outside of the school. So with the regulation, this is prohibited.
So schools will continue in June up until the end of year exams?
Yes, we will continue until the end of June. So we gain valuable school time for the activities of the student and for the activities of the school. We extend actually the school year practically until the end of June, and this is very important.
Cyprus Minister of Education and Culture, Kostas Kadis, talking about the reforms to the Cypriot school system.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Earlier this week, the Cyprus Red Cross invited the press to the launch of a programme it's running at the Kophinou Reception Centre for asylum seekers and refugees. The president of the branch in Cyprus is former First Lady Foteini Papadopoulou. Foteini, first, can you tell me how important is this sort of programme to the work of the Red Cross? Because I think most people think of you more as giving clothes and food aid and so on to refugees, but this is going a bit further.
Yes, because I believe that it's a very important program, because we have to stand and help these people who are coming to our country. And if we want them to be part of our country, we have to do something for them so they feel at home. So for me, it's something very important, and it's one of our program that it's completely in the views of the Red Cross and, of course, what the Red Cross does all over the world.
So what exactly are you going to be doing in Kophinou? Working mostly with the children?
With all the people. We are going to work with the adults, some programs for them like gymnastics or lessons if they need with the language, the Greek language. Of course with the children, because the children, they are there all day and going around, and they need to have some entertainment and somebody to look after them sometimes also. and also the children, the ones who are attending the schools in the area, because sometimes they have difficulties with their homework, and it's very important to help them if we want them, if they are going to stay in Cyprus, to be part of our society.
So this is very much Kophinou based. What about the other families that have now left Kophinou and are living all over Cyprus, actually?
Yes. Well, there are some families who are already, they are part of the Cypriot society, let's say. Some have found work, and some had already family here who they were already settled.
Do you have any outreach programs for them?
For some of them, we don't have a special programs, but if they need us, we are here. We don't have a special program for them. This program that we are launching today, it's especially for the Kophinou Center.
Former First Lady Fotini Papadopoulou, who's the president of the Cyprus Red Cross branch, talking there about the new plans for helping the refugees and asylum seekers at the Kophinou Reception Centre.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Cyprus Justice Ministry is mulling over a new report which suggests that we need to toughen up penalties for errant drivers here in Cyprus. Well, I think if you're a regular listener to the programme, you'll know we've often talked about the road fatalities and the traffic statistics, which really have not been very good for a number of years. Joining us on the programme this week is Professor Andreas Kapardis, who's carried out a study with the University of Cyprus into exactly this issue. Andreas, what were the main findings of your report?
The main findings basically were that, first of all, and this is started on a positive note, if we look at the number of serious accidents, the number of fatal accidents over the years, they've really come down by about 300% in the last 40 years. So there is a downward trend. What's not positive is that the proportion of fatal accidents as a percentage of the serious has gone up. So you have less, but when they do happen,
they have a
death
great
is certain. This is because now you have more pedestrians featuring in those cases, and it's often the case that we are talking about an elderly person. Usually, they may be crossing at night without anything that stands out in the darkness, and careless drivers just simply run them over. And so that's one finding is the trend, the long-term trend. The other finding is that we can now differentiate between high and low-risk drivers, as one would have expected, but we can document this. Thirdly, it's now well documented that the available penalties in comparison to what there is even in Greece, in the current state of its economy, is appallingly low. I'm talking about a fine of 85 in comparison to a fine of, say, 600 or 700. Vastly different. And of course, it's significantly less than what you would expect to get in the UK. The other significant finding for me is that when you look at the factors that contribute to the accidents, we do find that the same ones crop up, like alcohol, speed, carelessness, and of course, nowadays you also have drugs, something which the last few years governments have been trying to sweep under the carpet. But the truth is, it's there, and we need to acknowledge it and deal with it. And this also features in the case of driving. Now, right in the report, I couldn't help thinking that when I took my driver's license overseas, it was a tougher test. And secondly, I had a friend who was convicted of speeding, and he lost his license on the spot. So that made me think about perhaps the need to, and this is the last finding, the need to provide the police and the courts with a greater variety of measures, like, for example, impounding the vehicle, having it removed, and then the owner can pay the cost for the taking away, the parking and the rest of it, as well as the fine for the traffic offence. That's one. The other one, which I think would be worth introducing, would be under a community service order which we have, which has been available in Cyprus for the last 10 years. A condition might be for such errand drivers to offer a number of hours at a rehabilitation centre for paraplegics, tetraplegics, victims of car accidents. And I think that would really put some sense in some of these irresponsible drivers. At the same time, we have to think very carefully about the elderly, which gradually become a significantly greater proportion of the population, and their needs. And of course, in the case of the elderly, I'm talking about retired people and older, where we need to consider retesting every number of years.
And medical checks and so on.
Of course, and medical checks and so on.
But let's stop there for a minute, because the problem right the way through all the things you've said is that we have the laws in place. The problem is they aren't implemented. If we look at the driving test, it's not so very long ago that you slipped 50 quid to the tester and you passed your test. And in terms of medical checks, unfortunately, there are doctors that if your eyesight is not as good as it should be to be driving, you can slip them something and they'll say it's fine for another 2 years. So that surely is what we have to tackle as well, because as long as that corruption is there, then it doesn't really matter what laws you enact, does it?
I think in the case of drivers, corruption is not the major problem. The major problem is driving fast, not respecting drivers, being careless because of talking on the phone, for example, on a mobile phone. Of course.
Yes, but that's not enforced either, is it?
Driving under the influence, and as I said, under the influence now means both alcohol and drugs, but especially alcohol. Imagine if the police tested every Tom, Dick and Harry coming back to Nicosia early on Sunday afternoon, where they've all been having lunch on the coast somewhere. How many thousands you would expect to find over the limit? That's what I would suggest. I think they should. The police has a serious difficulty. It's not that they are corrupt. I disagree with this, and I know the Cypriot police very well. That's not the problem. The problem is being understaffed, underpaid. First of all, there are now 600 cops understaffed the last 3 years. I know they have advertised about 200 positions for the police. That's something, but it's not sufficient. Also, morale in the force is very low.
Okay, but if we get back to the old idea that drivers need to also take responsibility, don't they?
That's the best.
And that they need to be taught when they're taking lessons. Do we have in place any minimum number of hours that you need to be a learner before you can take your test? Do we have special rules for newly passed drivers?
3 points. One, I think we do have a number of hours. But secondly, and this was one of my own conclusions, we need to differentiate young, inexperienced drivers, aged 18 to 21, for example, and deal with them as a separate category, being subject to stricter legislation and so on. And at the same time, simply punishing people is not the answer. The answer is in instilling, as part of a national strategy, the right road conscience. What do you call it? The right road conscience. A basic component of which is the respect for other people. And of course, respecting the law.
I would also suggest to you that it's teaching people how to drive according to the conditions on the road at the time, because we have laws that date back to when cars were totally different machines. Now, if you accelerate away from a traffic light, to get into third gear, you're probably going over 50 kilometres an hour. So, first of all, the in-town speed limit on most roads is totally unrealistic. And I think it instills into drivers an idea that, well, this is so stupid. Whereas if, like in some places in Germany, you had no speed limits, but you were taught to drive according to the conditions of the time. I'm sure people can hear the thunder in the background of our chat. I've just come to see you in absolutely torrential rain. People don't slow down. They don't put their lights on. It's very simple.
This is where the test does not really simulate realistic driving conditions. In an earlier study of drivers' behaviour, which I did with my research team, we also had a simulator. When you simulate night conditions when you have rain and wet roads, then people's ability is tested to the limit. And I think they need to reconsider and revise the driver's test to include road conditions which are realistic, including darkness and, of course, wet conditions. I mentioned that the other day when I presented the findings and the conclusions, and everybody agreed. What was also positive the other day, from my point of view, as an academic and a researcher, was to see members of parliament from different and sometimes opposing political parties taking this on, the call for tougher penalties, as a bipartisan issue, and agreeing that they definitely want to move ahead as fast as possible and introduce revised legislation, and they actually adopted all my recommendations.
So when are we going to see the traffic cameras back at the traffic lights, but also some more very basic provisions that ensure drivers are thinking properly before they get behind the wheel? I mean, we still have people who don't put their seatbelts on.
That's right. Well, I was the one who brought the legislation for seatbelts. You know how long ago? 30 years ago, I was on a holiday in Cyprus and I had brought with me legislation for seatbelts. We got it through in the 80s. I haven't been back since then, but that was something which I took on to introduce. Now, obviously, what we need, I share everybody's concern about the long delay, and it's inexcusable for reintroducing speed cameras. Incidentally, I went back to when it was introduced for 11 months, and I looked at the traffic statistics then. It did have a significant deterrent effect the year after, and 2 years later, there was a carryover effect. So that tells me, and it convinced everybody, I think, when the results were presented, that there is a very strong argument for tougher penalties, but tougher penalties must be accompanied, and this is what I strongly argue as a criminologist, they must be accompanied with a significant risk of being apprehended. And a traffic camera is one of the best ways to apprehend deviant drivers. I call them criminal drivers.
Can I ask you whether at the meeting where you mentioned the MPs last week, whether they agreed with traffic cameras? Because as I recall, the last time this came up, the whole question of privacy and so on was brought up by members of our parliament, and it took a very long time to pass.
I think they resolved the issue. You must remember that some of these, what seem to be weird, esoteric legal issues that occasionally crop up, have to do with a very antiquated constitution. And if Johan goes back and reads some of the articles in the constitution which guarantee privacy, data, and so on, this often hinders law reform. That has now been overcome. I think they have taken, as I've already indicated, unduly too long. It's inexcusable. But I'm glad to say they seem to be down the home straight now. So I expect to see the cameras within, by the end of the year. That's what I've been told. But like you, I'm also keeping my fingers crossed. At the same time, there will be a few more police, and that will add to their strength and presence. But I agree with you that at the end of the day, the best, and of course we need to explain to our listeners that when we're talking about tougher penalties, increased risk of being apprehended, we are contributing to prevention. We actually prevent accidents from happening. So we don't take pleasure in being punitive, but we aspire to prevent. It's not a euphemism, this is what in reality happens. And the last thing I want to leave listeners with, the last thought, is that in Cyprus we have nowadays a multicultural society, and a large component of our component comes from Northern Europe, who drive much better. And I think we have next to us often friends, other drivers, and perhaps we should learn from them too.
That is Professor Andreas Kapardis, who was behind the study that calls for tougher driver penalties. And we should see some action before the end of the year. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.